Thank you very much for coming out this evening. We really appreciate the attention to what we feel is a very important matter. First, I'd like to just thank any distinguished guests. We have some distinguished guests in the audience this evening. Thank you very much for coming out. And Green Rock as an organization, our goal is really just to help to raise awareness and to advocate for things that are in the interest of us socially, environmentally, and economically. And when we learned about this plan that was being put in place, and we learned that this plan would actually impact all of us for the next 20 years, we thought it was critical that people knew about it. We took the time, we met with the RA. The RA explained to us what they were doing, how the process was going, and we thought a whole lot more people knew about it than they did. So to our surprise, when we would meet people in the street, people had no idea. At that point, with the support of B-Solar, BEST, and several individuals who have come together to assist us in this initiative, we started to go about on a public campaign. So for those of you who are here, I'm sure either you've heard us on the radio, seen us on the news, or somebody's told you that they have heard us on the radio or seen us on the news. And tonight is our first effort to provide an opportunity for you to be able to learn about what's going on, and most importantly, to have any questions that you have answered. Ultimately, these situations are open for public input to help to shape a decision that actually meets all of our collective needs. In situations like this where we're not involved, the process makes no sense. So we're doing all that we can to make sure that we are involved and make sure that the decisions that are ultimately made represent our interests. So tonight we have a lot of special guests, but we're going to start off tonight's presentation with the CEO of the Bermuda Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Kendall Burgess, who is going to give us a brief presentation on the Cornell Queens project. So could you give her a round of applause, please? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I've been told I have 15 minutes, so this is usually an hour presentation, and I'm going to go quickly. So, wish me luck. I'm also having some challenges with the clicker, so if you see me doing this, it means I can't do it, you should do it, okay? All right, let's go, 15 minutes. About a year and a half ago, the Chamber was approached by a group of executive MBA students from Queen's and Cornell University looking for a real-world project or problem that they could solve. And so they called me up and they said, "Do you have anything?" I said, "Yes. How would you like to answer the question, what could or should Bermuda's next economic pillar be?" And they took it on. These people were, one guy worked at Google, one guy worked at NASA, one guy was in the CIA, one fellow was a computer whiz, and there was another person who worked in the lower US as a deputy governor, focusing on distress economies. So they were really, I think, the team that worked for us. So I asked them, could you please give me ideas on ways that we could do two things? One is diversify the economy, and the second one is grow jobs. And so they spoke to about 50 people in Bermuda, and they were everyone from the Bermuda College, they were angel investors, they were people at all of the alphabet groups, the BDA, the BTA, the BEDC, all of the alphabet groups. They were taxi drivers. They just crisscrossed our community. And they also came down and had a visit. and so that they could see the lay of the land and figure out who we are, what we are, and what could or should we do next. And they came up with the idea that Bermuda ought to be a beta site. That is a testing site for people who create things, innovators. And that we ought to create something they called Innovation Island. And so they mentioned a few examples, and they gave the contactless payment system, you know, the tap and go from MasterCard. They had to try that out somewhere before they rolled it out across the world. And they had to make sure they worked through all the glitches and so forth. And Bermuda could be that type of place. So they said, how do we get there? We need the ideal mix of workforce, that's trained, educated people ready and willing to work. We need money, seed capital. We need a place for them to do it that has access to internet, access to lawyers and people that could help them with intellectual property and copyrights and all of that kind of detail. And they needed policies, immigration policies that were friendly to business, so that when they were deciding on where and when to go, they would have some kind of a form that said, if you go to Bermuda, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and therefore they could make a decision very quickly, very easily, based on those factors. So, too fast. Roll back, please. Yes, they came to Global Innovation Island, two tranches. One recaptured economic activity, and the other one created economic activity. On the one side, they talked about sustainability and resilience, and that had to do with things like our food supply and our supply of energy, which is one of the reasons you're here tonight. On food supply, they looked at aquaculture, hydroponics, and all of the types of ponics. And they also looked at farming, so aquaponics, hydroponics, you know, the water and the food. They looked at those two things. And then under energy, they said we ought to split TD&R, transmission, distribution, and retail of our electricity grid. And these guys will go way more into detail in a little while later about that. On the things that generated economic activity, I was surprised to see that they came up with the text, the FinTechs, the RegTechs, all of the texts that you hear the government talking about now. So it was wonderful to hear an opinion from this group with no vested interest come up with the idea of where the government is going. So I think that's an endorsement for that idea. But they also came up with some ideas around tourism innovation. So we need basically a sea change. We really need to spend more money investing in education. And we need to look at things like industry-led education, which happens a lot faster than a 4 or 5 year university degree, which if you did that in technology, by the time you got to year 4 or 5, year 1 might be obsolete. So we need to design that ecosystem so that any kind of innovation, any kind of projects, those people know that if it's plug and play here. They could come down, bring their technology idea, set up, and make it happen. And the other thing is, not only do we need immigration policies, but we need all of those policies to change that affect that person being able to decide, Bermuda's a great place for me. They've got an innovation zone. I need to move my project there, and I'd like to do it. So all of those policies that are impacted by that, those are the ones that need changing. So, mariculture. This one I liked. Bermuda has about 21 square miles of land, but all of that sea all around, and we're not using it. We could be doing fish farming, floating farming. There's a study out there where a woman, it was sponsored by, I believe, BIOS and one of the banks. She's produced scallops, and that's commercially viable. And so we know that if we did that kind of farming, that would be employment for Bermudians, okay? Training course, a way to get people employed, and it would reduce our reliance on the types of those things that we import. Bermuda spends about $191 million on food, alcohol, and cigarettes. All that money leaves the island and goes off and never comes back. If we just captured a small part of that and left it here, growing lettuces, growing some fish, scallops, I even hear there's a type of shrimp that can grow here, then we could create jobs for employment for Bermudians and keep that money on shore. Pass. Okay, agriculture, same thing. Hydroponic farming. Many of you will know that Miles has something they call Miles to Grow, which is a container and they're growing lettuces in it. One 40-foot container grows as much as 1 acre of land, okay? And it does it 3 times as fast, 3 times over. So we don't have a lot of land, but we do have the ability with access to energy and water that we could start some of this farming activity. There are about 70-something folks involved in agriculture. They're out there in their sun hats and hoes. But this kind of farming involves lab coats and courses that can be taught at Bermuda College and so forth, but it will allow people to become the strawberry woman, the pea man of Bermuda. But it would give them the opportunity to contribute to this community, to keep that money on shore, and to employ other Bermudians. So, energy. One of the things they said was we really needed some bold ideas around the energy, and we needed to use more renewables. And when they presented to me, they read this out, and I want to just read this verbatim. They said, imagine the year 2040. Bermuda has emerged as a global laboratory for innovation. The island has reduced its dependence on imports to fuel and feeds itself with aggressive adoption of locally produced food and renewably generated energy. The island brims with energy. Solar panels dot the skyline alongside Bermudian roofs that collect both rainwater and sun. Other renewables and distributed generation fill the gaps across the island. Bermuda remains vibrant and modern, connected by a most advanced and reliable power distribution grid. Fueled primarily with renewed energy, the island is buzzing with electric vehicles, no longer dependent on foreign oil. The island is dotted with farmers' markets, selling fresh, locally produced food, grown with innovative and efficient methods by agribusinesses, households, and neighborhood co-ops. Bermudians are eating healthier while reinvesting and supplanting the high cost of food imports with support for local growing infrastructure. And that's a vision that I would love to see. Now, there also came up some ideas around tourism innovation, and the best way to explain this is to look at some examples of what other people are doing in other places. Tahiti and Singapore have decided that they want to capture innovation around tourism. So one on the front end, one on the back end. So one is encouraging people to bring their innovative tourism-related ideas, and they will give them seed money and develop that product, and they hold contests around that so that they're on the front end. The other place is on the back end, where they're allowed to build it out there, and then the technology, the people are trained, they pair them with local businesses. There's even there's a place, one of the Eastern Bloc countries has decided that it's going to innovate around aging. So things like dispensing of medicines, monitoring, all that. So they have pulled in conferences and the leading minds on aging. And so countries are deciding what it is they want to select as their area of innovation, and then they are encouraging people to come there with incentives to pair up with local people to make that work. Click. Oh, did that go too fast? Right. Mariculture. Now, this idea really interested me. They talked about us being able to rent the oceans. So we've got that 200-mile exclusive zone we all know about and hear about. They talked about the idea of Bermuda being given an equity position if we allow things like pharmaceutical companies and innovators to go on our shores and look for the next cure for cancer. And so we could rent the oceans to these people with the idea that if they come up with the next aspirin, that we would take an equity position in their discoveries. So I thought some really, really, really fantastic ideas. Click. So, what were the low-hanging fruit? The idea of revolution, of revamping the farming industry is one that we absolutely ought to do. They put me in touch with a man called Mr. Leor Hassel, who is in Hawaii. He was hired by Larry Ellison, we all know from America's Cup. We don't really know it, but we know of him. And he's doing the same thing there. They have hydroponic farming. They have a lot of the same issues we have. All the food's imported, the cost of electricity is high, et cetera, et cetera. But Mr. Hassel has started growponics over there, and he's willing to talk to us so that we can figure out how we can get something here, going on here. The rent the ocean idea, I think, is something we could do. I spoke with the gentleman in charge of intellectual property for Bermuda. He was off to a conference a world conference on intellectual property. There are precedents on what that rent the ocean proposal looks like, so we don't have to try and reinvent the wheel. And there are pure examples of how to do it wrong, so we can look there and figure out how not to do it, so there are examples there as well. Industry-led education, that's a big piece. Especially industry-led education around technology. I presented this to many, many, many groups, but one of them was the US Counsel General. And she has agreed to bring a gentleman in December who has worked on industry-led education around the technology piece. And that means that they have figured out, they've educated their population, tech companies have moved in, jobs have grown by hundreds of a percentage. So there's going to be a man coming down in December who's going to talk to us about how his project in his community has flourished using that. So in speaking with the BDA, I asked if they would consider hosting conferences around tourism and around some of these ideas to bring those experts here so that we could talk about how we could get these things started, the conferences. And so, yeah, there we are. I think it is, it's a wonderful plan, but as Bermuda, we're known as a nation of planners, not necessarily doers, if I'm speaking 100%. I am absolutely, absolutely keen on this project, and the full report is about 90 pages. I'm willing to share it with anybody who cares to read it or who is interested. I also spoke with Erika Smith of BEDC. Erika provides small business loans and opportunity, and I challenged her to come up with loans so that anyone, including my cousin who wants to live off the land, if he is interested in becoming the bean man, the strawberry man, or whatever, that he ought to be able to go to her and figure out how he can do that. Now, obviously, There are some roadblocks to setting up a container in your front yard, like having a container in your front yard. But I think that if the government is serious about considering alternatives to where we are now, then they would take a hard look at some of our laws and figure out what we need to do to make some of this stuff happen. So that, in a nutshell, is it, and I'm happy to take questions. Do I have questions now? 15 minutes. Yes.
You talked about the gentleman that's coming down in December. Is that going to be open to the public?
The gentleman that is coming down in December, he will be hosted by the Chamber of Commerce. It will be open to the public. We'll put the notice out. We'll create a story around it in the local media, so you will have the opportunity to hear him talk. Yes. Yes, in the back.
If I could just one minute, I could just ask if anyone has any questions, would you mind coming up to the microphone? Just because we're recording this session, just to make sure everyone can hear. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
How are you?
Good.
That's good. So, first question that I had, right? You say you're going to have industry-led education. Question that I have, didn't you do that at one point? Trade skills. What's the difference now?
When I say we are going to have, I said we should have.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm asking, let's say that we look at history, right? History is bound to repeat itself. Everything is certain, right? If we've done this before, and it seemed like even when that was happening, it was only those that were or not franchised, but had a certain level of privilege that were able to forward themselves. How does this again help Bermuda?
Okay. Well, I think I'm not going to dwell on the sort of historical part of it, but what I can tell you is what I know is actually happening now. I know that the Bermuda College is committed to putting on a program around new farming techniques. I know that Cedar Bridge Academy is also doing so. And I know that there are lots of people who are doing this in small pockets around the island. And so what we need is a comprehensive plan and program to put it together. But let me give you another example, because it looks like you're going to say something else. Sure. There's also another example of industry-led education that I think bears mention, which isn't in this program. The Compliance Association, RCA, I believe is their acronym, they decided that we needed more compliance officers in Bermuda with the way the legislation is going on. They didn't go the traditional path through getting you to take 4 years of study in the college. They worked with the college to create an industry-led program, an approved program on compliance. 6 months later, the program was up and running, and they have graduated Bermudians in that program. So I know that it absolutely works. I can't speak to what the government's thoughts, feelings, rules are on education. I only know that if I can encourage the industries in which I work with to produce the education that makes this work, then I'm on the right path.
Good. Next question. The part where you had said, what was it? It was along the lines of the next, imagine 2040 when our people are able to eat better food because of hydroponics. How much research do we have on that?
How much?
Research do we have on hydroponics? Because I'm thinking within 20 years from now, that's my generation, 40 years old, that's living, eating like that. How good is that for my health as 26 right now to 20 years later down the line? How much research do we have to say that's actually a viable option?
Well, let me try and deal with part of that question. How good is it for your health?
Yeah. And do we have numbers and research and do we have information to say it's worth what we're about to do? Because this sounds kind of dangerous for me versus, no offense to no one, but y'all ain't gonna be here 20 years type thing. You feel me? But that type of...
I hope to be here. I hope to be here.
But yeah.
But okay, let me answer the question. So,
That's all.
Okay. Hydroponics is just basically, it is a way of growing things without soil in some cases, through water and nutrients. It is not a lot different from growing things in the ground, which in some countries is now more dangerous than ever with things like Monsanto and the weeds and the products that we spray on them to make the apple that shiny or that orange that orange. If we grow these things here, then we can control what they're growing in, how they're growing, who's growing them, and we will actually have a view on that rather than now when we get a head of lettuce grown by Dole. Unless you look Dole up, you really don't know what it takes to grow that head of lettuce. So I think that people like you and people like my daughter with this program will actually be a lot better off because you'll know the source of your food.
Yeah. Give thanks, very good answer. And I'll just say, if this will be the last question, I just if we could keep it brief. We have a lot of information this evening, so we want to get to the next part.
I got one basic thing. I'm old enough to remember the introduction of iceberg lettuce, the marketing research that was done through this country.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're talking about marketing something.
Mm-hmm.
Experimentation. We're the guinea pig. What's the benefit we get? Because we're still paying the same market price for that iceberg lettuce that we were the guinea pig for.
Okay.
So where does the general public get a saving in the pocket?
Okay, well, the savings may or may not, the head of lettuce may or may not cost any different. And let's just assume that, you know, it's $4 for a head of lettuce that we import. It may still be $4 if you buy it from the guy at the corner with his hydroponic station or vertical garden, because he still has to pay for power and water and everything else. The real difference in that is the guy at the corner lives here and the money goes to him and the money stays here. That's
That's what I'm talking about. We're the guinea pig on an experiment. Experiments go right and go wrong.
Okay, so
there's no
Kandaree, just
experience.
1 second. If I could just interject, because I think what's happening with the line of questions is taking it off from the point of the presentation. The point of the presentation is that we have opportunities to use innovation to move the country forward. If we're talking about tests and is it healthy for me, we all have choices. You could get your vegetables from Miles, you could get it from the lunch cart, you can get it from the farmer's market, that won't change. We always have options. So if you don't want to involve yourself because you're not comfortable eating lettuce that came out of a container, then you can just buy it from the same place you keep buying it from. You know, what I don't want is for us to find ourselves totally distracted into a discussion about that, when the point of this presentation is to show us that we've been doing things a certain sort of way for years. And now there are opportunities for us to use innovation and start to do things differently. The benefit of this presentation was that it helps to open up our minds to new possibilities, because that's what the next presentation is about. And if we find ourselves rooted in doing the things the same way that they've always been done, then we're quickly going to find ourselves behind. So thank you very much, Kandaree, for bringing the presentation to us this evening. I'm sorry we don't have anything to talk
Let me just
about.
give my email address. If anybody is actually interested in receiving the full report, then I'm happy to send it to you. My email address is kburgess@bcc.bm, and BCC is Bermuda Chamber of Commerce. kburgess@bcc.bm. Thank you.
Okay, so we had some more people come in, so let me reintroduce myself. My name is Eugene Dean. I'm on the board of directors for Green Rock. I got my Green Rock shirt on now, so I feel a little bit better. And let me just help to introduce, if I can call Stuart Crindle up here. I'm going to call Stuart because Stuart's been very instrumental in this moving forward. He's the one who actually called me and got me tuned in to this issue. And Stuart's from B Solar. And I want everyone in here, some others in here from B Solar, and I know they don't want to take all the credit and things of that nature, but in actual fact, B Solar is the company that's actually responsible for commissioning these energy experts from UK-based energy experts from Etude to develop an alternative energy plan for Bermuda. So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask if you can give them a round of applause for their contribution. And what's been very beautiful is that several other people, as I said before, have gotten involved. And now what's happening is that this is starting to become a plan for all of us, because other people are seeing the wisdom in it and moving forward and supporting it. So now we want to get started with the second half of the presentation, the Bermuda Better Energy Plan. I'm just going to start off by just trying to give you a framework around what's actually going on right now. So the way the legislation is set up in Bermuda, our current electricity provider, Belco, is actually commissioned by government. They're responsible for writing the plan that determines how we generate and distribute energy for the next 20 years. We have a regulatory authority that's been created, and the regulatory authority is responsible for reviewing and then determining or having the final say in terms of what goes into that plan. Oh, I didn't pick up the clicker, did I? Okay. Now, the plan that Belco has developed will see us relying on fossil fuels for the next 20 years. Involved in that plan is the proposed development of a $140 million LNG plant. What would that mean for Bermuda? More pollution, volatile electricity prices. All of us are very aware of how high our electricity prices are. And all of us are aware of the fact that we have a fuel adjustment fee. We have a fuel adjustment fee because we have no control over the price of oil. The price of oil is not a stable price. Depending on what's happening in what parts of the world or parts of the world where oil is generated, that dictates what the price of the oil is. Sometimes when you look at that fuel adjustment, it seems like it's more than your actual bill. Okay. So this is a little bit about the planning process. Belco developed an initial plan. There was a consultation. Alternatives plans were submitted, one of which is the Bermuda Better Energy Plan. And now we're actually in the phase for consultation again. This is why we find it important to get all of you here tonight, because we want each of you to recognize that you have the opportunity to give input into the final decision. Hopefully tonight you can learn a little bit about at least these two plans, and then you will be able to write to the RA and let the RA know what you feel you would like to see your energy future look like, which plan you support and why, what technology you would like to see and why. All of those things are acceptable. All of those things can have influence over the final decision that's made. Now, once that decision is made and a plan is agreed upon, that plan determines what type of technology gets approved to come into the country. So, if the plan that's approved is primarily fossil fuels, an LNG plant gets approved. If the plan includes a mix of fossil fuels, renewable energies, and it's seeing the renewable energies increase over time, then maybe there's no need for a huge LNG plant, and then as a result of the plan, that type of proposal or technology wouldn't get approved. So this is why it's critical. What happens if this plan locks us in to certain technologies? You can come back one so I can just, yeah. So just to give you a quick snapshot, on the left is a snapshot of what Belco's plan is proposing. Primarily imported fossil fuels. On the right-hand side is the mix that's being proposed by the Bermuda Better Energy Plan, which includes solar, wind technology, all renewable, free, clean energy. And it also takes in effect energy efficiency, which is something that is happening over time as our appliances and the equipment that we use just becomes more efficient. This would see us, the period that this plan governs is between now and 2038. And as you can see on the Bermuda Better Energy Plan, we have more reliance on efficiencies and renewable energy than imported fossil fuels at that point. So, to go into detail, oh, one more thing, I'm sorry. Again, these are the organizations who have supported the Bermuda Better Energy Plan: Be Solar, Green Rock, BEST, and the Bermuda Solar Energy Association. I also mentioned there are a lot of individuals who have gotten involved and supported, and these are some of the names of the individuals who have come in and financially supported